Alright, hello everyone, Void here coming back at you all with another deck tech video for Commander. This time, yes, we're going to go with another pretty brutal strategy. That is mill with Bruvac the Grandiloquent. 3 mana, mono blue, 1/4 legendary human advisor. If an opponent would mill one or more cards, they mill twice that many cards instead. It's cool to point out now that mill is a keyword, so instead of put the top cards of the library into the graveyard, it's just one word, makes things simpler. So the deck is, as you would imagine, a massive mill deck. I have different groups here. I have 40 cards dedicated to mill. We have some draw spells, we have some counter spells, we have some ramp and removal. Going over our land base though, it's pretty simple. I didn't want to dump too much money into this deck, so it's around 250 to 300. And there are also some strategies I wanted to avoid, like the Painter Servant one. It does take the fun out of building up your mill engine. So we got 33 basic islands, 1 Myriad Landscape, Nykthos Shrine to Nyx to get more mana, and a Scavenger Ground. This one is very important. We don't want our opponents to get those cards back from their graveyard. So just pay 2 mana, sack it. You exile all cards from all graveyards. So it's better than a Tormod's Crypt. It's better than a lot of those cards that are capable of dealing with graveyards. And yes, you are giving up a land, but that's really worth it mid to late game. We do have some ramp here in the form of Soul Ring, Wayfarer's Bauble, Arcane Signet, Mind Stone, Sapphire Medallion, and Sky Diamond. That's pretty much what we want our ramp to be. Anything more than 2 I think is a bit excessive. Our commander's only 3 mana. So we have turn 1 plays, turn 2 plays, and then let's play our commander and maybe another spell. That's ideally what you want anyway. You don't just want to have your commander out there and do nothing else. So let's jump into the mill strategy. We have Altar of the Brood, which is probably one of the best value cards in the whole deck. 1 mana, whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. So with Bruvac, that's going to be 2 cards for every permanent. Very simple, accounts for land drops. In a single turn, you could play a few permanents. Each opponent will mill 6, and that's just off a 1 mana artifact that's just going to sit on the board and put in a lot of work for the deck. Hedron Crab is, in a similar sense, going to do that, but the value isn't quite there. Still good with Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, target player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard, so they mill those 3. Increasing Confusion is an X cost spell. Target player will mill the top X cards of their library, and if you flash it back, they will mill twice that many. So this is one of the deadliest cards in the deck if you have mana on your side. Drowned Secrets is kind of similar to Altar of the Brood and Hedron Crab in the sense that it's a low effort card. 2 mana enchantment, we can get it out there early, so whenever we cast a blue spell, we get that mill value. So it's a target player, and they're going to put the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. With Bruvac, that'll be 4, so pretty cool. And Fascination, another X costed spell. We can have either each player draws X cards or each player puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard. Very good that we have that versatility. We don't always just want to mill. Sometimes we want to get that sweet card draw. Then we have Folio of Fancies, also offering us card draw, but it does give us a great ability where we can pay 3 mana. Each opponent puts a number of cards equal to the number of cards in their hand from the top of their library into their graveyard. The first ability pretty much making the second ability more powerful. Manic Scribe, another small creature that's just supposed to sit out there early on and collect you some value with the mill strategy. The Delirium just keeps it going. Great ETB, dumping 3 cards into the graveyard for each opponent. And another high value artifact, Mesmeric Orb, 2 mana. Whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller is going to mill the top card of their library. So your opponents have to decide whether they want to play Magic. Because with Bruvac, you can only tap so many lands. Every time they untap before their upkeep, they're going to have to mill an insane amount of cards. We also have Mindcrank. Now this deck isn't capable of dishing out damage. Mindcrank is just another good artifact that sits out there early on for just 2 mana. And whenever they are dealt damage, they lose life. They're going to have to mill those many cards. And a cool little trick here, I am playing the Persistent Petitioners. You can have as many of them in the deck as you want. They have a nice little mill activated ability where you can pay 1 and just target an opponent. But if you have 4 advisors, which our commander is an advisor, making this strategy pretty good, we mill the top 12. So with Bruvac, it's going to be 24 cards. Pretty deadly if we can just keep doing that ability. But the deck would be kind of boring if I just put nothing but Persistent Petitioners in here, so I decided against that, and they're kind of hard to find. It's not the easiest thing for everyone to get, like 30 or 40 of these. Chill of Foreboding, each player puts the top 5 cards of their library into their graveyard. Flashback of 8, Same thing, it's a good reusable spell. You get to mill 10 pretty much each time you use it. Fraying Sanity, going after a specific player, this card can be very deadly, doubling the amount of cards they're pretty much milling. They're going to have to mill again at the beginning of each end step. Memory Erosion, whenever an opponent casts a spell, they have to mill the top 2 cards. So again, hurting your opponents when they just want to play Magic. That's kind of the theme of the deck. Psychic Corrosion, whenever you draw a card, each player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. Deadly with mass card draw. So if we play something like a Windfall, that's a lot of cards our opponents are going to have to mill, and they're going to have to draw. So their deck is going to be tiny with a lot of these cards. Riddle Keeper is a good defensive card. It's more just about being on theme. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, that creature's controller mills the top 2 cards of their library. So nothing super great here, but the idea is that if our opponents have a big board and they need to attack us with numbers, they could be potentially committing seppuku. That's 2 for each creature, 4 if Bruvac's out there. Sphinx's Tutelage, another good punisher if we draw a lot of cards. Target opponent puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. If they're both non-land cards that share a color, you repeat the process. So potentially deadly just because of that. Bond of Insight, each player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard. Really good because we can return up to 2 instant and or sorcery cards from our graveyard to our hand. A lot of these good mill spells are instants and sorcery, so Bond of Insight, in addition to being mill, is just going to help keep our turn going if we have it. Dreamborn Muse, incredibly deadly creature. We have a lot of mass card draw, keeping hands full and forcing them to mill, putting in a lot of work for our mill strategy. And we have Startled Awake, another good sorcery, top 13, they mill. We can then flip it, Persistent Nightmare. Skulk, when it deals combat damage to a player, return it to its owner's hand. So it's reusable. We have a way to get it back to our hand and then do another 13 or another 26 depending on you know what. Archive Trap, cost 0 if an opponent searched their library. Target opponent puts the top 13 of their library into their graveyard. Another very deadly thing. I know 13 out of a 99 card deck is not a big deal, but because everything is essentially ×2 in the deck, it kind of is now. Jace Memory Adept, the 0 is insane. 5 mana to just mill the top 20 of a deck. You probably already knew this was going to be obnoxious, but overall, I mean, a lot of these cards are just low effort. Mill as much as possible. Psychic Spiral, now this one's pretty crazy. We shuffle all cards from our graveyard into our library, and then target player puts that many cards from the top of their library into their graveyard. We are also going to, unfortunately, mill ourselves, but this is a pretty good way of getting those cards back. And if we have 20 or 30 cards in our graveyard, that could be game over for a player. We have Stitcher Geralf, great activated ability. Unfortunately, a big weakness of the deck is that creatures are not going to be that strong. This does give us some power in creature tokens, while also being on theme with the mill. And Traumatize is pretty much a kill spell. If target player puts the top half of their library rounded down into their graveyard, well, that's going to be twice, right? Now it is rounded down, so they could have like 1 card left in their library, but even then, the overwhelming majority of people are not coming back from this. And then we have Fleet Swallower to pretty much do the same thing. It is rounded up though, so it is pretty much a guarantee. Now we do have some card draw in here. Most of it is going to be typical blue card draw like Ponder or Preordain. We have Rhystic Study and Windfall. These are pretty much no-brainers in mono blue. We have Thought Scour though to be a little bit more on theme. Target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard, letting us draw a card after that. We have Visions of Beyond. So we draw a card. If a graveyard has 20 or more cards in it, you draw 3 cards instead. Very easy to do that in the deck, especially in Commander. We also have Patient Rebuilding. At the beginning of our upkeep, target opponent puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. Then we draw a card for each land card put into the graveyard that way. So it's also mill, but primarily I view this as a way to get more cards. We have some good counter spells in here. Again, I want to be more on theme, not so much oppressive and competitive. Broken Ambitions is just an X-costed counterspell. Like, there's a ton of them. They're not always the best because if an opponent has a lot of mana, well, it's not going to counter a spell. But we can also clash, which clash pretty much means the players reveal the top card of their library, and a player wins if their card has a higher converted mana cost. If you win a clash, that player mills the top 4 cards. We also just have a generic counterspell. We have Didn't Say Please, so you counter a spell and then they mill 3. Fierce Guardianship. This is a newer card, but it's just too good to not want to include. If we have Bruvac out there, we get to just counter a target non-creature spell for free. We have Thought Collapse, which is pretty much another Didn't Say Please. And then we have Counterman, which is pretty much 4 mana counter a spell, and then they mill 4. We do have some removal here, but not a lot. Again, there's going to be obvious weaknesses in a deck like Mono Blue. We have Pongify, Cyclonic Rift, and Reality Shift, just to deal with creatures. And then other than that, we do have a Spark Double just to take advantage of the fact that we can copy Bruvac and the copy won't be legendary. So we get even more mill power. But anyway, guys, that's pretty much going to do it for the deck. Like with Tiny Bones, and probably even more so with Bruvac, you'll probably get hated out of your playgroup pretty quickly, so just be cautious. But anyway, Void here signing off. Have a wonderful day.